Stage 1, go. Stage 2, go. Flight directors go for launch.
On Thursday evening, 33 engines lit up at once in South Texas. The force they produced was greater than any rocket in history. The vehicle they lifted was a version of Starship that had never flown before, sitting on a launch pad that had never been used before. After 7 months of silence, SpaceX was back. This is the story of Starship V3, the version that finally turned a prototype into a vehicle that can actually go somewhere. To understand why this flight matters, you have to understand what came before it. Starship's first 11 flights followed a pattern. The booster would light, the rocket would climb, and somewhere along the way, something would break. The first half of 2025 was particularly rough. 3 flights in a row ended in explosions. The 4th flight, in August, finally made it through. The 5th, in October, did the same. By the end of 2025, SpaceX had reached the limit of what the existing design could do. The old version, called version 2, could carry roughly 40 tons to low Earth orbit. That sounds like a lot. It isn't. NASA needs Starship to land astronauts on the moon. For that to work, the vehicle has to refuel in space. For that to work, it has to carry enough propellant for an entire second journey. Version 2 couldn't. So SpaceX threw it out. Not the whole thing. The 9-meter diameter stayed, the general shape stayed. But almost everything else got redesigned, hundreds of changes. A new engine, a new launch pad, a new way of separating the 2 stages, a new fuel transfer system roughly the size of an entire Falcon 9 booster. They called it version 3. Then in November 2025, the first V3 booster imploded during a routine pressure test on the ground. It hadn't even reached the launch pad. SpaceX scrapped it and started over with Booster 19. That was the booster sitting on the pad on Thursday. The numbers behind the new vehicle are hard to comprehend until you compare them to history. The Saturn V, the rocket that took astronauts to the moon, produced about 7.5 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. NASA's Space Launch System, currently America's flagship heavy-lift rocket, produces about 8.8 million. The previous version of Starship already held the all-time record. Starship V3 produces roughly 18 million pounds of thrust. That comes from a new engine called Raptor 3. Each one generates 280 tons of force, about 22% more than the engine it replaced. The booster carries 33 of them. When they all fire together, the combined thrust comes out to around 9,240 tons of force. Nothing in the history of spaceflight has come close. The engine itself looks different too. Earlier Raptor engines were wrapped in external plumbing, hoses, and a heavy shield that had to be installed around each one. Raptor 3 has almost none of that. SpaceX rerouted the secondary fuel paths through the inside of the engine itself. The shield came off. The plumbing went inside. The result is an engine that weighs less, produces more, and survives re-entry without external protection. The rocket sitting on Pad 2 was also 4 feet taller than its predecessor, standing 124 meters from base to nose. Inside the upper stage, 22 dummy Starlink satellites waited to be released. 2 of them carried cameras designed to photograph the rocket's own heat shield from outside. The first time anyone has tried that during a flight. And on one section of the heat shield, engineers had deliberately removed a single tile, just to measure what happens during re-entry without it. The launch window opened at 6:30 in the evening, Texas time. A countdown for a vehicle this size doesn't feel like a normal rocket launch. The plume from 33 engines firing together is bright enough to be visible from low Earth orbit. The shockwave travels for miles. When the engines lit, the ground around Starbase shook hard enough to register on seismographs designed to detect earthquakes. The first stage burned for about 2.5 minutes, pushing the upper stage to the edge of space. Then, hot staging happened. The booster's engines stayed on briefly, while the upper stage's engines also ignited. Separating the 2 pieces, using the force of the exhaust between them. The booster turned around, fired its engines a second time, and started its descent toward the Gulf. For the first flight of this version of the vehicle, there was no attempt to catch the booster on the launch tower. SpaceX wanted data. They didn't want a complicated recovery on a brand new design. The booster splashed down offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. Meanwhile, the upper stage kept flying. It deployed all 22 satellites in a controlled release. It relit one of its engines in space, the kind of maneuver future missions will need to leave low Earth orbit. The two camera satellites turned and began imaging the ship's heat shield from a distance, scanning for damage in something close to real time. Then the ship started its long descent, halfway around the world, toward the Indian Ocean. When it splashed down off the coast of Western Australia about an hour after launch, SpaceX had its first complete V3 mission in the books. If you want stories like this, the engineering bets that actually shape what comes next, subscribe. We cover them every week. What happens after Flight 12 is where the stakes get real. NASA needs this vehicle to land astronauts on the Moon by 2028 under the Artemis IV mission. The lunar lander is essentially a modified version of the exact upper stage that just flew. Before that mission can happen, SpaceX has to demonstrate something they've never done: transferring propellant from one Starship to another while both are in orbit. That single capability is the bottleneck for everything that comes after, including the Moon, Mars, and the orbital data centers Elon Musk has been talking about for years. Beyond NASA, the financial pressure is enormous. SpaceX filed confidentially to go public in April. Analysts expect the IPO valuation to land somewhere above $2 trillion, which would make it the largest public offering in history. Every successful flight pushes that number up. Every failed test pushes it down. The next launch of Starship is already scheduled for sometime in June, with a 13th test flight that will start putting V3 through the missions it was actually built to fly. And then there's Mars. Musk's 2026 compensation package includes a clause that pays out a substantial portion of his shares if SpaceX successfully establishes a permanent colony of 1 million people on Mars. That sounds absurd, because it is. But the vehicle that would have to take them there is the one that just lifted off from Starbase. For now, the headline is simpler than any of that. The most powerful rocket ever built worked. The records it set on Thursday will hold until SpaceX itself decides to break them, which, based on their stated timeline, might be next month. After 7 months of silence, Starship is back, and the version that's flying now is the one that was actually built to leave.